Do British personal finance people hate lattes as much as American personal finance people do? Or do they say like, you do well to lay off the Earl Grey, old chap? Don't know why I decided to sound like that. Do Canadians say, you gotta cut back on... Oh, wow. You gotta cut back on the maple syrup? I can't do it. I don't even know what a Canadian accent sounds like. Sorry, Canada. If you're either of these things, please let me know what beverage your country's personal finance gurus hate. Sound off in the comments. I'm Ben, and this is Sketchy Advice. Today, we're addressing the most tired, overdone, unimaginative piece of personal finance advice out there. Stop drinking lattes. I've talked before about why this is probably the wrong advice if your goal is to actually improve your financial situation. There are just more impactful changes you can make that require less discipline and deprivation. But I recently discovered a whole new angle on this issue. First off, why do gurus hate lattes so much? Did a latte kill their dog? Did a latte stand them up at the junior prom? Are they secretly a latte and too ashamed to accept themselves as they are? I don't know. All of these are possible options. But let's look at what they say their reasons are. First, opportunity cost. David Bach literally has a calculator where you can see how much sweet ROI you're just slurping down your gullet. Just in case you need something new to talk with your therapist about. Then there's the idea that a latte habit is a red flag. Maybe we don't realize how much we're spending on lattes, which means we're probably making other costly oversights. Or maybe spending $5 on 24 ounces of bean juice just isn't responsible. So if we're doing that, we're probably being irresponsible elsewhere. But underneath all of that, there's this idea that your lattes aren't really making you happy. You'd be happier if you put all that coffee money into investments or saved up for a big trip to Thailand. And that sounds smart, but does the data support it? Well, I recently read a paper by a group of researchers titled, "If Money Doesn't Make You Happy, You're Probably Not Spending It Right." Which, what a title. Research over the last several decades shows that once a person is no longer impoverished, the correlation between money and happiness is actually pretty weak. And it only gets weaker. The writers of this paper claim that correlation is weak because we're just not very good at spending money in a way that effectively increases our happiness. It's like having a whole staff of personal chefs that only exist to heat up your Pop-Tarts. So they put forward 8 principles for happier spending. They're all fascinating, but today we're just talking about their third principle. Buy many small pleasures instead of a few big ones. When have you heard those words come out of a personal finance guru's mouth? I've seen TikToks that are like, buy that latte, it's not what's keeping you from saving up for a down payment. But the idea that small pleasures in the long run actually make us happier than big purchases that we save up for, that's different. So how did these researchers get there? First of all, research has found that when it comes to positive experiences, it's less about how intense they are and more about how regularly they happen. And that's because of a quirk in human psychology called adaptation. Think about the first sip of a latte, for instance. It's soothing, tasty, comforting. It's like that episode of Bluey where she licks the popsicle and everything turns into like a green water slide. I can't show it for copyright reasons, but the parents will know what I'm talking about. Now think about the 8th sip of a latte. At that point, it kind of just tastes like coffee. That's adaptation. We get used to things, and the joy starts to diminish and eventually plateau the more we get used to it. So the researchers propose, given the choice between eating one 12-ounce cookie in a single sitting or 2 6-ounce cookies across 2 sittings, we actually get more joy out of those 2 6-ounce cookies, even though it's the same amount of cookie. Which, by the way, who's measuring cookies in ounces? Eating the 7th ounce of a 12-ounce cookie is just not as enjoyable as eating the 1st ounce of that second cookie the next day. Now, we don't adapt to all things equally. Psychologists have found 4 primary variables that slow down adaptation: novelty, surprise, uncertainty, and variability. This is why video games have evolved from Pong, where you're playing the same game over and over, to big open world games like Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3. These games constantly tug on all these variables, preventing us from fully adapting and allowing us to enjoy them longer. To give a real life example, I have a weekly coffee date with my brothers that costs me about $4 a week. And that $4 always leads to a different experience. The conversations are different. Maybe there's a new drink I want to try. Sometimes I see another person I know. There's lots there to delay adaptation. Compare that to a few years ago when Maddie and I bought our first kind of nice car. It was a huge deal when we first got it, but after a couple weeks, it's just the car. The same today as it was last week. Frequency plus variability means more boosts of happiness in the long run. Now, there's lots of nuance here. I wear the same shirt every day, and that makes me happy. I could buy a new shirt every other day and rack up $8,000 of credit card debt, but I think the cons start to outweigh the pros pretty quickly. And of course, I've gotten a lot of joy out of big things I've saved up for. But if we're always demoting the small, immediate pleasures because the big, long-term pleasures are more important, we might actually be shortchanging ourselves. A study done in Belgium found that people who had a strong capacity to savor the everyday joys of daily life were happier overall. So, the better you are at stopping and smelling the latte, the happier you are. We all kind of know that. But here's what's interesting. Wealthy people in that study showed a diminished capacity to savor those little things. To quote the study, the positive impact of wealth on happiness was significantly undercut by the negative impact of wealth on savoring. Think about it. When someone asks you, what would you do if you won the lottery? What do you start thinking about? Exotic trips, nicer house, the best of the best, right? We expect wealth to unlock these top-tier experiences, the caviar of life. But when you're neck deep in caviar, it's hard to stop and smell a latte, probably because all you can smell is fish. So it seems that we ignore these little treats to our detriment. So how do you make space for little pleasures? What if you made a little treat category for yourself? What if you took that category for your massive once-a-year trip and tried breaking it up into smaller, more regular weekend getaways? What if having a somewhat embarrassing number of streaming services actually does serve you well? And if doing one of those things means you've got to delay your home renovation by a few months, maybe that's fine. Maybe you'll even be happier. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to prove to yourself that you're responsible. You don't have to say no to instant gratification every time just to have a few thousand extra dollars when you retire. You can just ask yourself, how do I want to spend my money? And go with that. Now, I am about to take my own advice and grab a kombucha on the way home. How about you?